So a couple years ago, my two best friends and I decided to go on a backpacking trip to Europe. One of the cities that we ended up visiting was Salzburg, Austria, which is where Mozart was born. It's also where the movie The Sound of Music was filmed, and apparently actually happened. Although maybe not quite like that. Anyways, pretty much like everywhere else we went on our trip, we ended up staying in a hostel. Although, of course, this means that you usually end up sharing your room with a bunch of other random people. Our first night out, we decided to go and see the city, and we ended up coming back pretty late because we found this awesome little curry restaurant down the street. Austria and curry. Who knew, right? When we first arrived at the hostel, we had already met our first roommate. It was some random German lady who liked to give us history lessons about the areas of Europe that we visited, even though we didn't really ask for it. By the time that we got back, we noticed that pretty much everyone in the hostel was asleep, including our crazy German roommate. Although we did notice that we had one extra roommate, another lady, who was asleep on one of the top bunks since all the other ones were taken. So far, Salzburg had been pretty cool, and we managed to get to bed without waking anybody else up. But then at like 3:30 in the morning, I woke up to what sounded like screaming. I definitely thought it was my friend Catherine at first. She was sleeping right next to me on a single bed that was pushed right next to mine, and she kind of did this thing all the time. She's actually punched me in the face a couple of times at sleepovers. But then I realized that the crying didn't really sound like her, and that they were talking in another language. So I rolled over in bed and I looked up to see that our mysterious other roommate had gotten herself caught between the railing that keeps you from falling off the top bunk and the pole that anchored the bunk beds to the roof and the floor. She was butt naked. So at that point she had wakened everybody else up in the room, including our crazy German roommate. Thankfully, though, she recognized that the lady was speaking Russian. Too bad none of us spoke Russian. So, as the Russian lady sits up in her bunk in all her wrinkly naked glory yelling at us, we tried to figure out through the confusion of being woken up at 3 in the morning by screaming what we could possibly do to get her down when we didn't even speak the same language. It didn't work out too well. So I end up running down a hall in the middle of the night to try and find an emergency phone to talk to somebody who does speak Russian, while my two friends try and calm the old lady down enough to get her to come down the ladder the proper way. After covering her up, of course. Thankfully, I managed to get the night desk person on the phone, and she comes running upstairs in a panic to try and help this lady. In the meantime, my two friends managed to move all the furniture in the room to create steps for the old lady to get down the proper way. They managed to get her down, but she didn't manage to stay covered up because apparently she didn't really care about that too much. Everything was all fine then, until Catherine decides to offer up her bed to the naked old Russian lady. I don't think I've ever wanted to punch somebody so much in my entire life. So, as my friends fall back asleep, I was stuck sleeping right next to the naked old Russian lady. I think I finally managed to fall asleep praying that the old lady didn't move across her side of the bed while I cocooned myself in my blankets as far away as I possibly could. But not before I saw her take out a little case full of needles and shoot herself up with something. So, not only was I sharing a bed with an 80-year-old naked Russian lady, I was sharing a bed with an 80-year-old butt-naked Russian lady who was doing drugs in our room. Needless to say, I wasn't exactly in the best mood the next morning. So, I didn't even notice when some guy came up to talk to us in the breakfast room. Apparently, he was traveling with the old Russian lady as a student. As it turns out, the old Russian lady was getting down in the middle of the night to take her insulin for her diabetes when she got caught in the bunk bed. And not only that, but apparently she's a master pianist in Ukraine with her own music school who was there to play for the Mozart Music Festival. The guy said that she wanted to thank us for helping her out by playing something for us on the piano, and that if we were ever in Ukraine that we could go and stay with her at her music school. Who knew? I mean, seriously though, what are the odds that you end up in a youth hostel in Austria with a master pianist that actually has her own music school? I know I'll never jump to conclusions again about old wrinkly naked ladies, but I guess that just goes to show you can't judge a book by its old wrinkly naked cover.